Hello and welcome again to Speaking Effectively. We are into the second unit of Module 1, in which we look at encoding meaning together through verbal and non-verbal symbols. In this unit, I will go into some basics of the communication process, which cuts across both speaking and writing, but we need to understand that in order to be able to speak effectively. So some of you must be already familiar with communication theory. Those who are not, I will try to brush your basics or introduce basics to those who are not familiar with the basics of communication theory, to tell you what is communication, to understand what is communication, whether we communicate through word of mouth or we communicate through writing. What exactly is communication? Perhaps you could guess an answer and tell me what you understand by communication. In my classroom, usually the answer is to express oneself, to share one's ideas, to exchange ideas, to exchange thoughts, to express one's thoughts. Very rarely do people say to exchange emotions or to share feelings. So together in our classroom we try to construct a definition of communication, and this is how it looks like. To communicate is to send information. To communicate is to send not just information. When we communicate, we not only send information, but we also send ideas, feelings. We exchange, we don't send information, we exchange information, ideas and feelings. And to use a better word, we don't just exchange. What we do is we share meaning by opening a common door. We have a closed door, we open a door and we ask the other person to share our meaning. That's what we mean by communication. So let's arrive at a working definition of communication. To communicate is to exchange, to send and receive information and ideas and feelings with the objective of improving understanding. That for me is the working definition of communication. To share ideas, feelings, thoughts and giving and receiving feedback with the objective of improving understanding. This is what we mean by communication. And communication loop looks like this. In a communication situation, there's always a sender and there's a receiver. So it's a two-way process. There have to be two parties when we communicate. Of course, we can communicate with oneself, like if you're talking to yourself, or if you watch a Shakespearean play and you have these famous soliloquies where the speaker is talking to himself, a technique which has been borrowed in a lot of telesoaps, where the characters speaking to oneself in a soliloquy. Or we communicate with oneself in our sleep. When we are thinking, we communicate with oneself. But usually in a communication situation, we have a sender and a receiver. So let's look at some examples of one-way communication models: a memo, a lecture, a broadcast on radio or television, a newspaper report, a notice. On a lecture like this, where I can't see you but you can see me, an ideal lecture would be an interactive lecture where you can ask me questions and I can speak to you, I can put questions to you, but this is a one-way communication situation. Now in a two-way communication model, what we have a sender, we have a receiver. So the message goes from the sender to the receiver. But the communication is not complete unless the receiver gives feedback. So suppose you signal to someone and you assume that person has seen your signal. So a communication loop is not complete unless the receiver gives his or her feedback. So suppose you are in a party and you smile at someone, and that someone doesn't return your smile, and what happens? That communication is not, it's complete, because that person who doesn't smile back at you when you make eye contact with them and you smile at them, that person is trying to tell you, I don't want to make friends with you. So it's a form of feedback. It's a response, but the response is not equal to a feedback, because a feedback is more active. So if you smile at someone across distance at a gathering or a party, make eye contact and smile, and that person makes eye contact with you and smiles back, that's a conscious feedback. It's not just a response, it's a feedback. Now what do you do after that? Through this encouraging feedback, when the person smiles at you, you go forward, you walk across to that person and introduce yourself. So it's a two-way communication model in which the sender sends a message like you smile, the receiver return your smile, like that's the feedback the receiver gave you, and doesn't end there, because it's an infinity model, because the sender encouraged by the receiver carries forward that transaction, and that transaction leads on to more transactions. So two-way communication model has a sender to receiver and receiver to sender, which includes not just response, because we can't avoid a response like the person who didn't smile at you, but feedback is something you give consciously. Sender can modify the message depending on the receiver's response. So the person who did not return your smile, you also, your smile froze on your lips and you also stopped smiling, and you didn't have the courage to go up to that person and introduce yourself. But so the feedback helps you to modify the message depending on the receiver's response, and the sender can check if that message has been understood correctly. Now how do you check? Suppose you tell somebody in your office, would you mind bringing me my file from my cupboard? And that person, maybe because of the noise, did not hear you, or maybe that person was thinking of someone else, something else. So you say, get me that file from the bottom drawer, and that person doesn't bring it. So how do you know? You call that person and you say, did you, you wait for that person's feedback. So that person says, yes, I will, yes sir, or yes madam, I will bring that file from your drawer. Then you know, you can check if the person has understood your message correctly. So we look at the infinity model. As I said, that one two-way process does not complete the communication loop. It leads to more transactions. So when the person smiled at you, you went forward, you walked across and greeted the person, shook hands with the person, and then you were exchanging notes on your background, and by the end of the party you were planning to have dinner together somewhere, or meeting on the weekend for another get together and thinking of doing things together. So this is what is meant by the infinity model, that one transaction, completion of one loop, can lead to several other communication loops of this kind, which can go on to infinity. Now in the infinity model, in the communication model, when we assume that the sender sends a message and receiver receives a message, we assume that the message has been received. But no, sometimes the message isn't received. Suppose the phone line is bad, or suppose you are shouting to someone in a crowd and that person can't hear you because there's too much noise. So these kind of obstacles or disturbances can prevent the message from reaching the receiver. This is why you need to make sure that the receiver has indeed received your message by inviting or waiting for feedback from the receiver. Otherwise, you will make an assumption error and assume that the receiver has received your message when the receiver hasn't actually received your message. Now, what are the critical factors in communication? In addition to the sender and receiver, we have a channel, and this is where speaking and writing is important. What is the channel? The channel is whether you use the spoken channel or you use the written channel, whether you communicate by speech or you communicate by writing. It can be either of them, whether you use an email, whether you use a telephone, whether you send in olden days we used to send telegrams, whether you send a registered letter, or whether you send a letter by surface mail, or you send an email communication, or you just send flowers. It can be any channel you can use to communicate your message, and the channel is very important, and this is what we will be focusing on during the course, because the channel is crucial to the difference between speaking and writing. Channel is crucial to the difference between speaking and writing. So we have to make a judicious decision whether which message we will use, which channel we will use to communicate a message. So suppose you have a colleague, it's a professional situation where normally you send emails, because emails, written messages have their own value. But in this situation, you just come to know that your young colleague, a new recruit to your institution, has just lost a dear one, maybe somebody very close to him or her, a parent or a caregiver. The person has lost somebody very dear. Now what would you do? You have a choice of, you have received the phone call from his family, and the family has told you to break the news to your colleague. What would you do? Of course, the easiest thing is to pick up the phone and you say, well, I received a call from your father or your mother or your family member saying your grandfather or your uncle has passed away. That would be one way of doing it. But if you're a caring boss who your subordinates love, you would normally not stop at making a phone call or sending an email message. Particularly if you are not located very far away, you would actually go across to the person and break the news to the person very gently. Similarly, if you come to know that a colleague of yours or peer has received some major award, the easiest way is to send a mail or pick up the phone or send an SMS in these days. But there's nothing that beats going personally across to the peer, your friend, your colleague, or your subordinate or your senior, and say, I'm so happy to know, to congratulate him or her, and to say, I'm so happy to know that you have won this award. So now we go to the next important aspect, which is encoding and decoding, which is what I'll be addressing in this second unit on speaking effectively. The process of encoding and decoding and giving feedback. What is encoding and what is decoding? It comes from the word code. We all know what is the word code. In computer speak, you use the term code in a very technical manner, but even everyday persons or ordinary in common parlance, we understand code as a secret language in which the sender and receiver can send a meaning which can be understood by none other than the sender and receiver, right? So what is the trick in encoding a message? You find a symbol, you find a code or a symbol which is known only to you and the receiver, so that when you send the meaning, when you encode the message, the receiver is able to understand what you're saying, because it's not just enough to use a verbal or a non-verbal symbol to encode a message. The process is not complete unless the receiver is able to decode that message. So suppose you say that this is my wife is very homely. Now what you mean is, my wife is home loving, she's a homemaker, she's house proud. But the receiver is an Englishman, a native speaker of English, where the word homely means somebody who is not very good looking. So the receiver understands when you say my wife is very pretty and very homely. Now you are making contradictory statement, because the receiver has understood your meaning is that you are wife is a plain Jane and has nothing to do with homemaking skills, because in standard English, homely means someone who is not very attractive, who is a very plain looking person. So in this case, unless the receiver can decode your message appropriately, the communication process is not complete. Therefore, if you want to know whether your message has been encoded, decoded properly by the person who has received your message, you must make sure that you have received feedback from the person. Similarly, the person who is receiving your message should make sure that he or she has given their feedback. So if the person says, oh, you are saying that your wife is a lovely person, but she is not particularly physically very attractive, then you can modify your message. No, she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And then your English friend understands that in India, homely means home loving, not plain looking. So communication, let's conclude by saying that communication, in other words, is the sending and receiving of symbols and attaching meanings to them with the purpose of understanding one another. And this is what I'll be focusing on in the rest of this unit. The sending and receiving of symbols. Sending and receiving of symbols and attaching meaning to them. This is what I'll be focusing on. And in the units that follow, I'll be looking at different kinds of symbols, such as the verbal symbols and the non-verbal symbols. So this process of exchanging symbols, which is only half the job done, because the second part of the job is to attach meanings to them. And why do we attach meanings to them? What is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to be able to understand one another. So you might be a very articulate speaker, you might be a very flawless speaker, you have the, you are a professional and you're able to express yourself in Queen's English, and you're able to impress all your listeners with your perfect accent, your upper crust accent, and the use of your vocabulary. But what if that accent or that vocabulary turns people off? Because why? Because they think that you are placing themselves above them and trying to run them down by showing that they cannot speak as flawless English as them. So your job is not done, because instead of making friends with your colleagues and subordinates, you have turned them off because they think that you are trying to place yourselves above them. You are trying to show that you are a cut above them and they are inferior to you. Believe me, this has happened to me in my classroom of all places, because most of the students we have in IIT, they are not from, many of them, several of them are not from English medium schools. They come from the vernacular medium and they are not very fluent or articulate in English. So one of this kid was very honest when I asked him for feedback about English class, and he said, I hate professors who speak who speak very good English, because I feel nervous in their presence. So that was a very important feedback for me, because this kid was trying to say, okay, you speak correct English, but you put me off because I'm scared of you, and I like the teachers who can't speak correct English. So it was a very important lesson for me, that just speaking correct language or speaking a language fluently and flawlessly doesn't mean that you're a good speaker. Because what is the objective of speaking, or of writing for that matter? Is to be able to improve understanding, to send and receive symbols, whether verbal symbols or non-verbal symbols, with the objective of improving understanding, to increase empathy, to increase understanding of one another. So that's why I have used, it's not my model, but a model called the inferential model of communication. What does the inferential model of communication say? It says that communication is not about deciphering the meaning in the sender's mind by decoding symbols accurately. So we're going a step further. What did I say so far? I said that communication does not take place unless the receiver assigns meaning, understands the meaning that the sender is trying to send. So, unless the reader is able to decipher or decode the meaning that the sender has sent, communication does not take place. Now, I am going one step further. What am I saying now? I am saying that communication does not stop at merely decoding the meaning. You have decoded the meaning, but you have to go one step further. Why? Because you are actually jointly creating the meaning. So, communication is the joint creation of meaning by both sender and receiver in the process of exchanging symbols. How does this happen? So, suppose you say that get me a, I'm feeling tired. How you look tired. Suppose you tell your colleague, you look tired, and the colleague says, no, I am not. Now, the message has been decoded properly. You have conveyed a meaning. You have said that you look tired. The colleague is actually looking tired, and that's why you have said this. But the colleague vehemently retorts by saying, no, I am not. What is the meaning, the underlying meaning that's occurring here? But you are trying to say that maybe you are not fit enough to do the work. Maybe that's how the colleague reads your meaning, that you are looking tired, meaning that I am not in my full form. And maybe you try to say that you were actually concerned, and you try to say that maybe you are tired and maybe you should take it easy, whereas the colleague took it as a reflection on his or her abilities and sharply retorted by saying, no, I am not, or sharply retorted by taking the meaning otherwise and thinking that you are trying to say that you are not looking good. So, in that case, the meaning that you have given the word and the meaning that the person has given to that word, you have given the word tired by literally saying that you look tired, whereas the person who has received the meaning has read it to mean that you are casting aspersions on his abilities or saying that that person is not looking very good. So, what happens is the meaning that you intended is very different from the meaning that the person understood, even though the meaning has been literally decoded. So, what do we do in the inferential model of communication? Just decoding the meaning is not enough. One has to go one step further, and both the sender and the receiver have to create meaning together. And this process of the joint creation of meaning by both sender and receiver in the process of exchanging symbols is communication. Let's look at some examples before we close to see how do we communicate meaning. How do we communicate meaning in general? When you want to communicate meaning, how do you communicate? When you were a baby, in fact, when you first came into the world, how did you announce your arrival in the world? By bawling. When you were crying, people knew, okay, the baby is here. Or when you were still small and not able to speak, you were hungry, how did you communicate your meaning? Or you were sleepy, how did you communicate your meaning? You started crying, and this was a coded message between you and your caregiver. It may be your mother, it may be your ayah, or it may be someone else in your neighborhood who was your caregiver. And that person could read your different kind of crying by saying, oh, he's hungry or she's hungry, or say, no, she's sleepy, or say, she's got a stomachache. So, there was this coded language between you and your caregiver, which meant that your different ways of crying could be not only decoded, but meaning could be created by both you and your caregiver just because you work together to create the meaning. So, how do we communicate meaning? By choosing verbal or non-verbal symbols. Like you saw that when you were not able to speak also, you were able to communicate your meaning by saying that I'm hungry, by crying. So, even a non-verbal symbol can be used to create meaning. Now, we have a choice when we are trying to get our meaning across, which is communication, or when we are to modify it, when we are trying to create meaning together with the receiver. What do we need to do? We need to select some symbols. we can select a verbal symbol or we can select a non-verbal symbol, or we can combine the two. When we normally speak, what do? We use a cluster of symbols. Some of them are verbal, some of them are vocal, some of them are non-verbal, some of them are visual. We combine them to produce meaning. I am using the word produce rather than exchange or convey, because production means that you and the receiver have to create meaning together. And what is a symbol? That is the most important thing. What is a symbol? Symbol is something which stands for something. Say, take the Statue of Liberty in New York. What does it stand for? It stands for the American values of freedom of speech, democracy, equality, liberty, and so on, right? So it stands for something. And now what is the problem with symbols? Somebody who has not been to US, or somebody who doesn't know what the Statue of Liberty is, would just see it as a lady, like the figure of a lady, right? So let's take the example of people from different cultures to understand that symbols have no fixed meaning. Symbols have no fixed meaning. For instance, let's look at a very common symbol, like in the West, color symbols. In the West, white is the color of white is used, is a happy color, because white is used in weddings and women dream of white weddings dressed in all white. Whereas in India, white is the color of mourning in most Indian societies, except in some groups where white is used in more auspicious occasions, but in the larger part of Indian communities, white is the color of mourning. So now if someone is wearing white in India, it's assumed that the person is in mourning, whereas in the West, if you wear white in a wedding, it's considered auspicious. So these color symbolisms, unless you're from that community, you will not understand that symbolism. So suppose symbols related to class, a certain kind of attire, for instance, they are not universal. You wear certain kind of clothes. Suppose you're from that society, you know who are the working classes and who are the elite classes, depending on the way they are dressed. But suppose someone comes from another culture, they will not be able to tell the difference. They will just be able to describe that certain people dress differently from certain other people. But members of that group will be easily able to identify the class difference between the way you dress. So color, dress, all these, anything can be a symbol. Color, dress, image, light, sound, anything can be a symbol. And the problem with symbols is that they have no fixed meanings. Their meanings keep changing. Their meanings keep changing over space and time. Geographically and historically, their meanings keep changing. And that's why one symbol which meant something in one time or one place doesn't have the same meaning. So in order for symbols to work, what do you need? That both the sender and receiver have a common knowledge of the meaning of that symbol. So if you think white is mourning and your English friend thinks white is wedding, you will have a major confusion, because you will think, why, like when you go to formal occasions in the West, everyone's dressed in black. Now in India, black is a color of mourning, right? So you say, why are people dressed like this? Why aren't they wearing bright colors? That's because it's a cultural symbol. Black is a color which is used in formal occasions, whether you're making a presentation or you are going to a very formal dinner or formal get together, you normally wear black. Whereas in India, we avoid, it's considered an inauspicious color, and we avoid wearing black in auspicious occasions. So meaning is created through agreement. Meaning is not fixed. Meaning of symbols is not fixed. We create it through agreement. An exchange of meaning can take place only when both sender and receiver give the same meaning to the symbol. So I'll conclude with an example. Suppose we are in Kharagpur, and very often we are in the backwaters in a small provincial town, and very often we get bored and we say we miss the city life, and we say let's go to Calcutta. So suppose in a group of friends, someone suggests, let's go to Calcutta this weekend, okay, and the rest of the friends says, yes, of course, let's go to Calcutta. Now, it's assumed that everyone is happy that they are going to Calcutta. But what happens once they go there, what do the guys want to do? They want to go to a bar and get drunk in trinkas. What do the girls? I'm using very stereotyped gender roles, which is not true, but just for the sake of an argument, I'm illustrating it to say one group of people wants to go to Park Street and have the best food, because Park Street is the famous street for food, go to bars and get drunk, or go to the nightclubs and go dancing. Whereas there's another group of people in the same group of friends who want to go shopping to Newmarket, which is in the adjoining area, or they want to Goriahat and do more traditional sari shopping there. Or there's a third group of friends who want to go and do sightseeing. They want to go to the Victoria Memorial and see the Victoria lit up at night, or they want to go to the Ganges, to go to the riverside and go on a ferry and take a ride on the river Ganges in the moonlight. So everyone has a different idea of what Kolkata is. So when you say, let's go to Calcutta, everyone jumps. Let's go to Kolkata, everyone jumps. And everyone has a different meaning of Kolkata in the mind. Some people are thinking, I'm going to shop to my heart's content. I'm going to shop in Park Street, Goriahat, Newmarket, Vardhan Market and City Centre and whatever, the malls. The other group is thinking we'll go sightseeing. The third group is thinking we're going to binge on prawns and chingli march and Chinese food and blah blah blah. And some want to just admire the colonial architecture on Park Street and what is called the White Town. In Calcutta, we have the White Town, which is the British town, and we have the Indian town, which is the Black Town, where the native people used to say. So here we have Park Street, and there's Quality, and there's Park Hotel in the neighborhood, and there's the Oxford Bookshop, and if you go inside, you can go dancing in Tantra. But the other person, the receiver, when they said, okay, let's go to Calcutta, let's go to Kolkata, they thought they'll go to Sham Bazaar and have the Pantua, which is available in a very famous shop in Sham Bazaar, and they thought they will go and buy Tangail saris in Sham Bazaar, or they would go to Kali Ghat and buy all the souvenirs from Kali Ghat and go to the temple. So Kolkata for some is crowds, for others it's Rabindra Sangeet, for the third group it's shopping. But what we need to do to be able to communicate is to create meaning together by asking and giving feedback. You say, oh yes, I just want to walk down Vidyasagar Setu. So then the sender says, oh, I can't get to Park Street. We will be going to Vidyasagar Setu, and these women and these men will be just walking down Vidyasagar Setu. The other person says, oh, I want to go to Park Circus and I want to get into a tram. So you say, oh, hell with my dancing all night, I'll be doing tram rides. And the third person says, I want to go inside Victoria Memorial and check out the museum and the archives. So what you need to do is check with each person what you meant and what they understood were the same, so that there is clarity. There may not be agreement, but there is clarity that when you said you want to go to Kolkata, you wanted to paint the town, White Town red, go to all the bars, get drunk, go partying all night, whereas your friends wanted to go shopping. So why do some symbols mean different things? Because of the filters of communication. We differ according to our knowledge, status, culture, communication skills and emotional states. That's why each of us assigns a different meaning to the same symbols. From this we will move on to encoding through words.